Hi, this is Bill Hartzer, and this is the Digital Marketing Podcast with Bill Hartzer for Thursday, October 29th, 2020. And this is, I believe, is the 46th version, the 46th version or episode, I should say, of the Digital Marketing Podcast with Bill Hartzer. And today I want to talk specifically about email deliverability. And we think about digital marketing and so forth. And with digital marketing, I usually talk about search engine optimization, as well as social media. And I've had content guests. I have had people talk about content, social media topics, paid search, PPC, Facebook ads, SEO. I've talked specifically about optimization on your website and internal links. But I think it's most important to actually just talk specifically and realize that part of digital marketing specifically is email deliverability. And a lot of people don't really think about email deliverability. And it's one thing that honestly I didn't really know too much about until I started talking a little bit more with a friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine named Chris Lang, who I have. One of these days I will get Chris onto the digital marketing podcast with Bill Hartzer, and we'll go through some really technical things with email deliverability. But in fact, actually, what I want to do is go have this episode talk specifically about the kind of the high level aspects and parts of making sure that when you send an email, whether from your domain name, like Bill at Hartzer.com or Bill at BillHartzer.com, and those are my own. It's not a Gmail account I'm using. I'm using my own domain name, or my agency domain name, or my company domain name. And email deliverability is kind of a niche that is becoming more and more popular, and there are some experts out there that talk specifically and help you make sure that when an email is sent from your domain name, it is received by the person who you're sending it to. And it is getting tougher and tougher to send an email, or to send an email through your email newsletter, or maybe offers to your customers or potential customers or people who are on your list. It's getting more difficult over and over, and getting extremely difficult in a lot of cases to make sure that when you send that offer or you send that email, whatever format is in, that the receiver actually receives it in their inbox. So there's a few things that every domain, I don't care if you have an email newsletter or not, or if you have you send 5 emails a month or 5 million emails a month. It doesn't matter. There are 3 things that you need to do to make sure that there's a better chance that your email is delivered when you send it. So there's a few things and that I want to go over. The first thing is I want to mention DM Protect. So DMProtect.com is a service that I developed the algorithm behind DM Protect. And essentially it's your credit score for your domain name. And we don't really look at, in this algorithm to figure out, okay, how risky your domain name is. We don't really specifically talk about or look at things on your website. We're concerned more with settings and how you've set up your domain name. And when it comes down to setting up the domain name, there are certain factors that make sure that you won't they're risk factors. And for example, if there's a certain time, you need to register your domain name for at least a few years in the future, because if it's only registered and it's going to expire soon, then you're probably going to have, it's going to be riskier than whether or not you've registered that domain name for, 2, 3, 5, 10 years or forever. And Epic is the only registrar that allows you to register your domain name for one price, but forever. Essentially, you will never have to pay a renewal fee in the future. So you essentially won't lose your domain name because of you failed to renew it. The other issue is there are records like DNSSEC. DNSSEC, every domain that has a website needs to have DNSSEC enabled. Essentially gives more security to your domain name, and it secures the DNS, the domain name system. Essentially what happens is when you type in a domain name into a web browser, there's a lookup that happens, and that lookup essentially looks at a table of data and says, okay, the information and the files for this website are on this IP address at this particular location. It does that quick lookup. Well, we can actually, in that whole DNS process and so forth, the same thing happens with the email. When an email is sent, we need to know the system needs to know essentially where to get that email and where to pull it from, what IP address and where the domain name's located, and points to. So DNSSEC actually kind of essentially encrypts and secures that whole backend system, and it's not something you or I see. It's not related. It is not related to HTTPS. Having a secure website. It's actually more on securing the domain itself. And I really wish, frankly, that more domain owners, like yourself, if you have a domain name, that you need to make sure that DNSSEC is enabled on your domain name. And the way you do that is you basically contact your registrar, your domain name registrar, wherever it's registered to, and wherever it's registered, whether being that Epic or Network Solutions or Dotster or Namesilo, Namecheap, wherever it is, wherever the domain is, you need to actually make sure that they turn it on for you. And it should not cost anything. It's just a matter of sometimes opening up a support ticket with them and asking them to turn it on. There are some registrars who basically allow you to log in and turn it on. That's kind of rare, but it needs to be turned on. And it's something that you can do now to kind of help secure your domain name in the background and so forth. So the other parts is related to email. And I was talking earlier about email deliverability, and that's what this episode is concentrated on. And DNSSEC is one area. It was helping secure your domain and the domain name records, and the domain name system, that what we call the DNS. And actually, so there's 3 parts: DMARC, DMARC, DKIM, DKIM, and SPF. And those basically are essentially a way to show the servers that when an email is sent from your domain name, and I'm using Hartzer.com as the example, when I send an email and I want to make sure that the receiving web server knows that I've essentially digitally signed that email. And in that case, when I send the email out, I've digitally signed it to say, okay, this is the IP address, this is the domain name associated with this particular web server, and that's where the email should originate from. what can happen is that somebody else who could actually spoof my domain name, or they could fake that they're sending an email on my behalf. And so you could receive an email that says it's from Hartzer.com, but it's an email that I didn't really send to you. And so this is important because of the fact that if you have these records enabled, there's much more. It's your email is essentially digitally signed or signed, and it's more trustworthy. There's a better chance that somebody who is receiving that email will actually get that email, because when I sent out that email, when I send it out, it's digitally, it's signed from my server, so that actually helps how the receiving web server actually say, okay, this is an email that's more trusted, and so yes, I'm going to deliver it and put it in their inbox, essentially. It's not a guarantee. I mean, it's not a guarantee that it's not going to go to spam, but it's at least puts you at a very big advantage, because you're setting this up, and this is a setting that these are 3 settings that need to be added. It's essentially fairly easy to set these up, and there's kind of 2 parts to it. The DKIM, DKIM, and the SPF records. Those can actually be gotten from your, for example, if you're using cPanel, you can generate your web server will generate those records, and your web host can actually help you generate those records. But it's particularly if you use cPanel and WordPress, which is fairly common nowadays, you can go into your cPanel and you actually click on email deliverability and go through, and that will actually allow you to generate the records. And you literally copy the string of characters and you put those in the DNS. So if you're using Cloudflare, for example, which is a popular system for handling DNS, but also for handling essentially content delivery network, which makes your website load faster. Wherever your DNS is, and you kind of need to figure that out. And if you look at your Whois record, you can look at the name servers, and it'll basically you'll be able to see whether or not those are, for example, pointing to Cloudflare, or if they're pointing to your particular web server or your web host. That would probably be somewhere where you'd add those records. You can also add them if they might be actually at your registrar, if you're using Epic or GoDaddy or Network Solutions. They might be hosting your DNS. So that's where you essentially go into that area and you add a record. So you would specify that it's a TXT record, and you copy the data from the SPF record that was generated, and you just paste it in there and hit save. Same thing for DKIM. I have actually also been using for DMARC. DMARC essentially is a way to, is also, part of email deliverability, and you want to have a DMARC record as well. That essentially is think about it as it looks at all your emails, not the content of it, but it basically says, okay, are there any errors of sending or receiving these emails? And if there are any, then it's saved in a particular location. And there's certain services like DMARCian, DMARCian, that essentially what'll happen is with DMARCian you can log in there, and it will analyze your records and analyze any errors sending and receiving. Like it doesn't really look at the content of the email itself, but it looks at kind of the behind the scenes, if you will, and looks at that area. So again, there are basically a couple different records: DMARC, DMARC, DKIM, DKIM, and the SPF records that need to be added to the DNS of your and this domain name system of your particular domain name. Once you've done that, it's kind of a one-time process. It should only take, once you actually know how to do it, it's literally probably less than 2 or 3 minutes to copy and paste those and put them in the domain. A lot of it is just a lot of the time is involved is just knowing where the records are and then and getting to and generating the record, clicking and copying and pasting. So if you know how to do this and you've done it for one domain, it's very simple to do it for other domains. I only, while I do believe that you should set up those records, especially DKIM and SPF, as well as DMARC, they all should, generally speaking, they should be set up for all your domains. Even though you may not necessarily have a website, and because of the fact that we don't really want people to be able to spoof our domains and say or pretend that they're from your domain name and sending email spam, from your domain. Another way to check if you're on email blacklists, look at you can run a DN Protect and get your domain name score there, because DN Protect will not only check the DMARC and SPF and DKIM records, but it also will check to see if you're on any of the major email blacklists. You will not be able to you will send and receive, but no one will receive your emails if your domain is blacklisted. And you might have even issues sending potentially. There could be even other consequences. Maybe a web host might not want even to deal with you if you're sending and receiving spam. So you want to make sure you're not on those email blacklists. MX Toolbox is another place to go, but essentially DN Protect will pull all those and aggregate it for you and tell you whether or not you have an email blacklist problem or not. So another way, so DMARC, DKIM, SPF records, dnprotect.com to check those if you have them. If you don't, then you'll need to set them up. And so this is about as much time I have for the digital marketing podcast, digital marketing with Bill Hartzer podcast for this afternoon. If you have any questions about setting those up, even why you need to set those up, and even what they mean or anything like that, shoot me. You can certainly get in touch. I'm B Hartzer on Twitter, as well as you can get in touch with me, BillHartzer.com or Hartzer.com as well. And also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button here, because every week I do have a new episode of the Digital Marketing with Bill Hartzer podcast, as well as I do have my Digital Summit t-shirt on today from the Digital Summit conference, and as well as and this post as well, if you're seeing this on YouTube. So again, set up your DMARC, DKIM, SPF records, and let me know if you have any questions. And hopefully, once you get those set up and validated and so forth, you can validate them at DNS at DMARCian, DMARCIAN.com. Thanks again. This is the Digital Marketing with Bill Hartzer podcast. We'll talk to you next week, and hopefully you'll get all of this set up, and when you send and receive emails, we will get them in our inboxes.